I left snakeskin on my floor in case you felt like coming by. Just inside the kitchen door, a heart-shaped note by its side, telling you to walk on by. Let me
All right, you ready to go?
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to draw on your horse drawn a little bit. Hope you don't mind.
That's
Things
fine.
you've said here.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. You have to know this place is legendary in more than one way. And the way you point out here, some of your neighbors that you describe vividly, their physical appearance, their limps, their habits, their language, old-time Vermont farmers, and you and your culture met with, and they seem to be happy to help and to take you under their wing. Yes, no?
Absolutely. Yeah. It was not a culture clash. No. And as I will be talking about this in my new book of memoir stories, there's another story that goes with this one, your horse-drawn yogurt. It's about our cider press. We found when we came here, and I'm using the we to refer to not just this household, but other households of young anti-war people throughout the state, who came to Vermont to try to make a new life. We found that many of the old farmers and had lost children. Their children died in the war, or they went to the war and they came back wounded and upset, or they just did not want to be here anymore. That they wanted to be anywhere else but here. Not everybody, but a sufficient number of them, so that when the older farmers saw us arrive with our interest in that old hay rake and that old cider press and that old tool in the meadow, and what was it for? They were only too happy to show us. We got here just when there was a year or two of work life left and all those tools, and we figured out how to use them with their help. That was important.
Your lifestyle, their lifestyle, very conservative, backwoods Vermont farmer, and your lifestyle, very liberal, very forward-looking. Do you think that, in a way, they might have envied you a little bit? Might have wanted to emulate you?
There were a few people maybe who felt that way, but I don't think so. They, God knows what they said about us in their kitchens, after we had been there, but or they had been over to see us. But no, I don't think that was much envy. They thought that some of the things that we spoke about and some of the things that we tried to do were rather foolish, but they allowed us that.
They had experience and you didn't have any.
Yeah.
Which is probably why they wanted to help, probably felt good about it.
Yeah.
The other culture I wanted to talk about, or for you, were you aware that there were people, I don't know how seriously, if you ever felt threatened at all, but I heard people say in Brattleboro, ex-Marines, others, goddamn Packers Corners, we're going to go down there, we're going to burn it out. I heard people say that. Were you aware of that at all?
Not really, but I mean, what had we done? What did we do? We were actually, it took a lot of work to open up a new garden over there in that field. It was grassroots organizing because the garden had gone back to sod, and we spent a lot of time out there, just pulling up grassroots and pulling up weeds. We worked really hard. There were a few people here who were more in the news because they had things to say about the United States involvement in the war. But for the most part, most people who came up here to live, and we were about a dozen. We came because we had enough education, we had enough talk, and we just wanted to learn how to work with our hands, with our bodies. And if there was hatred out there, I think it was probably knee-jerk, and it was not based upon any knowledge of us and who we were. And we were not very much of a presence in town. I mean, I had times here where I never went off the hill for a couple weeks.
You've written here in your horse-drawn yogurt, right at the top, tired of the Vietnam War, angry at my country. I moved to a hippie commune in Vermont and stayed for 9 years. Tired of the Vietnam War. By the time you came here, the Tet Offensive, and the very clear examples of the United States government through its military leadership, its political leadership, had outright lied to the American people. There's light at the end of the tunnel. Oh, who are we fighting then at the time of Tet? Is that what tipped you over?
Yeah, well, they folks I bought the farm in June of '68, which was just a few months after the Tet Offensive, and of course 1968 was a year when everybody who had any awareness of politics and action in the United States, and in fact almost anywhere in the world, was exhausted. I mean, there were so many cataclysmic events in 1968, starting with Dr. King's assassination and the riots and the Tet Offensive,
Bobby Kennedy,
and the student movements everywhere,
Democratic Convention.
Well, it was the night of the Democratic Convention when I was at a friend's house in Cambridge who had a TV, and I watched the cops in Grant Park, busting heads, even though that was in Chicago and I was in Boston. My overwhelming feeling was, I got to get out of the city. I got to get out of the city right now. I went back to my sister's place where I was staying. It was 9:30 at night. I had the directions, how to get to the farm. I had never been in Vermont before. I just, headed out of town. I got here at about midnight. It was very quiet. It was really wonderful.
That was a Wednesday, the night of that riotous police brutality. Mm-hmm. This is a Wednesday.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Not far away.
Wow.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. No, but and so when I speak about that year, about '68, and I arrived at the farm then, but I didn't move here until '69. When I speak about '68 with young people, they really want to hear about it, because it was an amazing time to be alive, and it was a time when people really began to understand, some of the overarching lies that we were living in.
It's also the year of the My Lai massacre.
Had to do something, yeah.
In March. So.
Yeah, and I, as a Latin American scholar at the time, I date my extreme involvement in politics in Latin America, which led to my play about El Salvador to 1968 in Mexico City, the massacre of students at Tlatelolco right before the Olympics. I've written about that a lot.
I need to read more of your stuff. I've been delinquent here. In that statement I read earlier, you said that you were tired of Vietnam, tired of your country.
Yeah.
This is your country, but not your country.
No, well, we came up here and I realized, there's so much more to my country than what I've known about, where I've traveled. This is, it was just a feeling that I'd lived in cities, I'd hitchhiked, and I'd driven across the United States a couple of times. I'd been to Mexico a few times. I'd lived in other parts of the world, but I'd never actually been in Vermont, really, and I never actually felt what it feels like to put down roots. I felt what it felt like to actually be in a place, a rural place, and not go to town, just work here. It was an amazing transformation for me. Also, I stuttered a lot, and I wanted to live in a place where my manner of speech was not that important, because I could speak pretty well once I was here to speak to the cows and the dogs and the chickens and pigs, you know. Didn't stutter with them.
Right. Now, when you got here, was there communal life already, or
Yeah.
or did you just fit into it? Yeah.
Yeah. I fit into it. I mean, I pretty much knew everybody who was here. We had met in Boston.
Were you all in kind then? In other words, you're Pennsylvania, were there people from, say, North Jersey, Connecticut, etc.? Where did everybody come from? Were the backgrounds similar?
Pretty much everybody had come from college in the Northeast, and they were all people from the mid-Atlantic states or from the New England.
All right, it sounds here like you had yourselves a pretty good time, but you, it seems, coveted some kind of order, some kind of system, some kind of constraint on complete freedom and independence. Bessie brought not only good fortune, she brought order too, and I can read between your lines to say you were relieved. No?
Yes, but I was not the only one. It was not me railing about a rage for order in a place where there was just chaos. I mean, we all felt and appreciated the irregularity that our regiment brought. You know, I'm a fairly neat guy. I'm usually in a household of people. I'm the neater one, but not obsessively.
You've also written here that books will need to be written about the collapsing center of the commune and others. Quarrels.
There were. Well, Veranda can speak about that. She was married to a guy who was very angry, and he expressed his anger quite a lot. And that was tough. We didn't. There were some quarrels. Did I say that? Yeah, I take it back. It was a pretty great life.
Mental illness you mentioned also.
Yes, mental illness. There were a lot of. There was one person who, who would often go into a catatonic state, and we'd find him in the basement, and we'd have to bring him up and shake him alive. There was one person who was rather bipolar, and of course, back in those days, people did not really medicate for that sort of stuff. It was all about therapy and trying to figure out, what was bothering the guy. I had a vision that I could make this guy well if I challenged him to a wrestling match in the barn. So over in that barn there, we swept out the hay from one of the stalls because hay really makes me sneeze, and we let everybody in the neighborhood know. So people were sitting up in the galleries and looking down, and I told him that I was his sickness, and he was going to have to wrestle me to get rid of me. And I'm a good wrestler because I was on the high school wrestling squad in Pennsylvania, so I have some moves, so he really had to fight hard. And I think it helped him a lot. It helped him a lot. It was, it seemed like, well, as it says in that story, further along, when you got, outlandish ideas like that, there was not a whole lot of voices in your head saying, maybe that's not a good idea, maybe you shouldn't do this, Peter, maybe it's going to make him worse, maybe you're going to get hurt. The idea was, I suddenly understood that we needed to physicalize his ailment more, and that if I could pretend to be his demon and give him a chance to wrestle me, that might help. Yeah, I think it did. So there was also alcoholism here too. That was tough. Because people whom you knew in one way, during the day, working beside, out here at night after they had a few beers or worse, that they would their personalities would change. They could be obstreperous too. It was tough.
You mentioned the breakup of some long-standing crucial couples.
Mm-hmm. Well, that was probably me, because I was with Eli's mom for about 6 or 7 years. We were never married, but we fulfilled the need of the farm for a child. Eli was born here, and
in this building?
No, he was born in a hospital down in Turner's Falls. He came here when he was 1 day old. To his everlasting shame, it says on his birth certificate he was born in Massachusetts. So anyway, because of the fact that there was some sexual experimentation going on, some people not really with long-standing couples, or some people were both gay and straight or bi. If you had a couple like Ellen and me who were together for six plus years, that became a kind of a solid center, for the farm. And I'm sure when we broke up, it was tough for other people too, besides for ourselves.
You do mention gay and straight. Well, we'll let that go for now. Let me move forward here a little bit. Later on, you mentioned other people were getting on with their lives, visitors, and letters told us of old friends making successes in the outside world. The Vietnam War had ended, so this is mid-70s, and once again the country turned undistracted to the thing that it did best, consuming. With a gluttony never paralleled in world history, the goods and services of the world's most prodigious economy in the cleanest, modernest, freest, funniest land of all. Fast food,
funnest, not funniest.
Funnest. Yes, you're right. Yeah. You write this?
I did.
Fast foods, fashion, drugs, cars, suntans, entertainment, electronics, labor-saving devices, all were there for the taking. You didn't even need cash. You could put it all on plastic. I'm not sure if there's a question there, but it seeks a comment.
Well, we were just a cash economy here. Nobody had a credit card. We had a 10-year mortgage given to us by the farmer's wife, who had her motor running when we came, left and moved to Greenfield, and we paid her about $225 a month for 10 years to own the farm. No bank involved, just all cash.
Incredible.
We never missed a payment. We never sold a drug.
Were any of you what James Michener in his book Kent State calls coupon communists, i.e. you were bankrolled from family connections back home and really didn't have to worry about money?
Let me say strenuously, no. There was nobody in this particular group at this particular farm that had any other income coming in. That wasn't true at Tree Frog Farm down the road or other places, but we didn't have that. What we did have was writing ability, so that all of a sudden, from not having any money or from having to wonder where the next coffee can of cash was going to come from, we'd write a book or a proposal for a book and send it out to New York and get an advance of $2,000 or $3,000. We also had parents, who would come up and visit, and some of them were. I mean, if you speak about envy there, perhaps they were a little envious of some of the paths that we took, because maybe these were parents that had always lived a very straightened life, and when they saw the success we were having and the fun we were having and the abundance of food and a good healthy outdoor activity, they would say things like that. Can I help? Do you need anything? And Marty's dad bought the tractor, which you see over there. It's still there. I was, so that, but no trust fund.
Okay.
But every once in a while, there was somebody who stepped in and helped.
You mentioned in here that I'm not going to call it a tug of war, really, but there were the influences of outside society, and some of the people here began to work in town and brought home real cash. Were you one of those?
Well, as I say in the story, I was a holdout. I was probably the last one who did that.
Did you do that specifically
Well,
to be stubborn, or did you want to maintain the life that you'd come here and carved out?
That was it. I thought that if we just worked harder, with the market garden, with the cider, with other things, and that we didn't really need everybody to go off to town to work, because we could see that if we did that, that would be the end. But I needed to have money of my own, not much, but some, because I had a kid, who needed socks and things like that,
You don't sound here like you were disappointed in the people that went to town to work.
Well, how could I be? They were so generous, they really were. I mean, if I had a project to build a new well, which is up there somewhere on the hill, to feed water to the barn for our milking, and if it needed a certain amount of money to make it happen, because the well tile and gravel, things like that had to be bought, and if somebody who worked in town said, I'll pay for that, with my paycheck, how could I resent that? That was wonderful.
Okay. We were survivors of our childhoods, our sorrows, our abuses by others and self-inflicted, survivors of our education. I'm a teacher, so I really like that one, and I know what you're saying, but...
Well, when I moved here, I had been in California trying to organize another farm among another group, a group of friends there, and then I looked around and I felt like we were all just out of college, all students. We were educated only from the head down to the neck. We had never done that much to work with our bodies, and I thought to myself, well, if this group in California does not work out, I have a backup plan. I had been accepted to go get a PhD at Santa Cruz in California to study for 5 years. I had a fellowship that was going to fund me for 5 years to study the history of consciousness with Norman O'Brown, who was a wonderful writer. And that was my backup plan. So even though I was beginning to think about organizing a communal life close to the land, I still had a backup plan. And a friend of mine climbed Mount Shasta. I mean, and we climbed to the top of Mount Shasta. It was probably September 1st, 1969, and I was due at Santa Cruz the next couple of days, find an apartment and to meet the faculty and stuff. I just had an experience up on the mountaintop, and this voice said, "You've got enough education. You know, where's the rest of your body?" So climbed back down the mountain, went to a phone booth. I called up Norman O'Brown and Santa Cruz. I said, "It's really give my fellowship to somebody who needs it. You know, I'm moving back east. I'm going to live on a farm in Vermont." It was a real decision, you know, to explore other parts of my body. You know, my arms, my chest cavity, my legs, my back. You know, I really had way too much education, I had wonderful teachers like you know, people who were really inspirational. But at a certain point, I just had to say to myself that that's enough for a while.
I misinterpreted your comment then. I thought you were going to say something along the lines of Paul Simon, who writes in one of his songs, "When I think back on all the crap I learned in high school." Yeah. But that's not what you're talking about. Okay. No. I'm glad you spoke about that.
No, it's just that it was never balanced out with enough physicality.
And in this piece, you talk about that specifically. For those who are watching you here and saying, "God, the guy lived on a commune. What a utopian life." You talk about muscles that you'd never used while you were sitting in the classroom.
Yeah.
So that's good. We could live off the economy better than we could live off the land.
That's where I start to cry. Yeah. That's right. You know, because that was a tough thing to realize, I have to say. You know.
Would you recommend what you did in your lifetime?
I think it's really sad that it's so much harder for people now to have an experience like this. I mean, the price of real estate, you know, has gone so out of sight. Also, people's expectations of what they're supposed to do with their life has gotten even more intense, and people are graduating college with, you know, $50,000-$60,000 of student debt, and thinking about you know, health insurance. I never thought about health insurance. I never thought about insurance of any kind. We had our cars, you know, or our farm truck. We were able to buy the smallest amount of liability insurance, and we had a home insurance on this one building here at the farm, but that was all. And people these days have so much regimentation, and you know, it's because of debt for the most part, and also because of the fact that it's stacked against them. You know, I mean, I would love for people, anybody who would want to do something like this, to have the experience of saying, "Okay, got enough education up here. Let me go work on the land for a few years, or do something really physical, really outdoors for a few years, and see if that fits." So I would, in that sense, I would recommend it. Yes.
How much of the Peter Gould that we're looking at here today, what percentage of you is this commune from years ago?
Well, there's not a day that goes by that I don't think about it. And there's not a day that goes by where I don't use some lesson that I learned here, or some skill that I learned here. There's also not a day where it goes by where I don't thank the fact that my orientation to money actually really was formed here. So I can be satisfied with much less than other people maybe can. But while I was here, I also wrote my first novel, Burnt Toast, and it went all over the world. And, it was a pretty successful first novel. So I began to really think of myself as a writer. So that's a big chunk of of how I think about myself now. So that actually really got well established here. Also, right over there in that room is where I did my first solo mime show in probably 1976, something like that. And up there on that hill is where I performed Shakespeare for the first time.
In the orchard?
Yeah. Well, higher up, actually.
Yeah, or it's wide open up there.
When John Carroll did A Midsummer Night's Dream, and I played a fairy, and then a couple of years later, when we took our Shakespeare outdoor performance over the hill to Sweet Pond, and I was Caliban in that. This island is mine. By Sycorax, my mother, which thou dost take from me. It was just I just found that a combination of hard work, physical work, and being a dad, and eating good food, and having really a purpose in my life, and having some time in the winter to write, and then having the desire to express myself even more, so moving into theater. No, that all happened over my 9 years here.
I'm curious, you mentioned Eli before, so I'll go back to him a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
As he was growing up and getting to the age where it's time for him to go to school, and what did you envision for him? What did you put into him that would say to him, there's a balance that you need to achieve here. It's not all one or the other.
I take no responsibility for him at all. He's his own person. Every once in a while, when he has a couple beers in him, he gives me a clap on on my shoulder and says, "Dad, you did a good job. I would not change a thing. So that's really great." We knew he was very smart, and that he would do. He could probably go to any college at all of his choice. So he went to Yale. I think he wrote his essay about looking up in the kitchen and seeing all the toothbrushes. Like 13 toothbrushes hanging on the wall, and there was only one small one. And that was his. So he wrote about that. And, he has always loved trees, and he's always loved the outdoors. I would be up here looking around for him, and Dad, look at me, and he'd be way up in the top of that tree there, the maple. Eli, would you come on down? That's a little bit too high.
Yeah. I don't want to bring a tear to your eye. Well, actually, I don't care. If you have a tear in your eye, I'll just finish this up. Maybe there's some kid with magic markers out there, or an elder man or woman reading this story, a brilliant, undiscovered native painter.
Naive painter.
Naive. Oh, yeah. Go find your brushes and paints, add some water, stir them up, clean off the kitchen table, and set to work. Make a picture and send it to me. I'd like to see a painting of that night when the old ways died, the night of the horse-drawn yogurt. Now, we haven't accentuated your story of bringing the yogurt back from the city, but I think the point is made here. We could cut it off at when the old ways died.
Well, we came here to rediscover old ways. We met a whole older generation of farm people who were keepers of those old ways, and they were mildly surprised and interested to find that we wanted to hear about them and know about them, because as I said, most of their children were not really interested to know about them. So some of those old ways became our old ways, and we kept them alive for a
Your
while.
new way was their old way,
short time, yeah.
when their children weren't interested anymore. Interesting.
Yeah, that's a generalization. I mean, it was not true of every family, but it was a part of our welcome here.
Birds talking to you, Peter?
Not too much.
How are we doing, G? How's our time?
It's about 40 minutes in.
Is it? Yeah. Is there anything you'd want to say? Something you mentioned? You want to talk about your orchard a little bit, or? I'm not sure if we can see it in there.
We'll get it.
You get it?
We're close, anyway.
In 1976, I was over there working in my workshop, and somebody drove up whom I knew from the Woolman Hill School in Greenfield. She was a friend of the farm. And
could you remind me of her name? I met her. Wonderful human being.
Betsy
Wally
Cornwall.
Nelson and...
Well, Juanito.
Juanita.
Yeah, they lived there. And Wally. But anyway, this younger woman, Betsy, was there too, and she came up and she said, "Peter, the Woolman Hill School has a school, and there's 6 or 7 alternative high school students. These are high school dropouts who there is no school in the area that would let them be who they are and do what they do and learn the way that they learn, except our school, and they're with us. And we're going to go on a 3-month trip to Mexico. Do you want to lead it?" Because she knew that I was fluent in Spanish, and I said, "Sure, I'll lead it." Yeah, I mean, when unexpected, things like that drop into your lap, you're supposed to say yes. And so this was 3 years after not even quite 3 years after the fascist coup in Chile, which I've written about a lot since then. In fact, that's what I wrote my thesis about, for my doctorate. But I had
You're talking about Allende?
Yeah. So I had the urge to go spend a while in Mexico. So Eli, who was 3 years old, and Ellen, his mother, and Betsy and I led these 7 really rambunctious, contrary, unteachable kids in this van. We left from here in the van and drove down to the border.
You drove from here?
Yeah.
To the border?
Yeah, to the border in Laredo. We parked the van. I got onto a second-class train and rode to Mexico City, and then we switched trains and we stayed overnight for a couple nights, I forget where, and went down to Oaxaca, which is a center of indigenous life in Mexico, in southern Mexico. Eli, who had never been sick a day in his life, he was like 3 years old. He was almost 4 at that point. Had developed this cough on the trip. We were about to go on a 10-hour bus ride from Oaxaca up to 10,000 feet and down to the ocean for some serious beach time on the Pacific Ocean. And I felt bad to subject Eli to a trip like that when I felt he had a bad cough. So I sent everybody else ahead, and I had Eli, and I said, I'll find you this. It's a very small town on the beach. I know where you're going. I'll be along in a few days. And I just looked at this a guidebook, and I selected a town that I thought might be an interesting town for us to go to. It was a weaving town of Zapotec Indians and peasants, not Mexican at all. So Eli and I took a bus there, and I had no idea that there was no place in the town to stay. I had no idea that there was no place in the town to eat. And I got there just as the weavers were closing up their barrows and bins for the day. And in Spanish, I said, "Is there any place in this town to stay?" And they looked at me like, "Who is this guy?" And they pointed out to a little hole in the wall store just a few steps away. And I went in there, and this Zapotec queen, who was only like 4'6", she looked up at me and she said, "You can stay here." And this woman became one of my dearest friends. And I've gone back there umpteen times to stay in that house. The first night that we were there, she told me, "My family has lived in this house for 900 years. So I, who had just been spending 7 years living a back to the land life, thinking of myself as a peasant, establishing a closeness to the land, learning about how to grow vegetables, was now in the presence of a woman and her children. The father was dead, who had lived in that house going back 900 years. And you could be sure that the corn that they planted was really a definition of heirloom, because they had been saving the seed for those 900 years, and it was high protein, and so I slept there that night. I bought a blanket. I put myself down on my back. I held Eli. It was at night. I mean, there was no glass on the windows. So at night, from the mountains, this cold wind and cold air came down. I was lying on my back and holding Eli, and we were wrapped up in the blanket. In the morning, he felt fine, but I had the cough. And we walked around town for a couple of days, and I realized that I was in the holiest place that I'd ever been in my whole life. So when he was better, we went over the mountain. We went down to meet up with the high school group, and I said, "I found a place. We're going to stop traveling. We're going to go back to this village, and I'm going to work out a homestay for everybody, and we're going to stay there for a month." So one girl, Stephanie, said, "I'm not leaving. I promise you I'll be fine. I promise you nothing will happen to me. I've never been on a beach in my life. You tell me where we should meet in a month, and I'll be there." We shook hands and we made an arrangement. This would never happen now. No. But anyway, so we went back and we stayed in the village, and I worked out homestays for everybody. And by the time I came back here in a few months, I had some really special bean and corn and squash seeds to plant here. And I was so overwhelmed by the experience of being with people who lived in an actual, genuine, traditional, land-based, sincere way, the life that I'd been trying to create here in such a superficial way. Just the contrast blew me away. But they appreciated, they appreciated me. And they appreciated our interest in their old ways, which were really old, and so that's become such a factor in my life. I was just down there with Molly last fall, and we're going down there again this winter, and it seemed to me to be really important just about the time when the old ways of this particular farm were dying, and were people starting to go into town, that there was a place in the world where I could go and learn a lot, and it was from that experience that the play that you speak about. A peasant of El Salvador came, because by the time it became incumbent upon me to write that play, I had been out to the fields with my friends there, and had really learned, how to push a plow. I had really learned how to plant corn and beans from somebody who did it in a genuine way, not because he had the encyclopedia of organic gardening by Rodale in front of him, to learn how. But then he had done it because his father and his father and his father before them had done it. So when I finally came to write a peasant of El Salvador, which is pretty much the first thing I wrote after I left the farm, because I left the farm in '78, and I began to write again a whole lot more. But that was the first really complete work I wrote. It was based upon that overwhelming experience, and part of the power of that play is that the people that I was writing about, I'd actually met, and they were very, very real to me. So, so that the last couple of years that I was on the farm, I had a garden of seeds that I'd gotten there.
Any of that seed left?
Special. No, I don't think so, because there were some years after I left the farm where I didn't have a garden at all, but I do again now.
When's the last time you performed The Peasant of El Salvador?
Probably 3 years ago. They really want Stephen and me to do it this fall, and as I go around Brattleboro, every time I bump into Dart Everett, who loves to play, and
He's
Peter
not
Abel,
the only one.
and Peter Abel, they say, give us a call. You have to do it this year. So there's not many months left of this year at this point, and Stephen and I need to get together. The point is, Stephen went up to his attic and opened up his suitcase, and the costumes were falling apart, and the moths flew out and stuff. But it just to prove to myself that I could do it, on a recent walk, I spoke almost all my lines. They're still in my head, because we did it so many hundreds of times. And just like in that story, horse-drawn yogurt, which makes me cry when I read it towards the end, because it does have spirit in it, and integrity. That play does too. And when I get every time that I get to the end of the play, and I'm on stage by myself for 5 or 6 minutes speaking about the events of the night, it's really overwhelming. So that wouldn't have happened, and that play would never have been written in the way that it was written had I not lived at the farm. And I was right over there in my shop when Betsy came and said, do you want to lead this trip? And if I hadn't led that trip, I would not have met these people who really moved me.
And the girl you left on the beach, did she make it back to you?
Absolutely. She just at the time that she was supposed to walk in the door in Mexico City.
She was incorrigible.
In Mexico City. No, she walked in the door. She said, "Thank you for trusting me. That was the best month of my whole life."
You in touch with any of those kids, or know anything about them?
I saw Patrick once, but now when I think about it, they were like 16 or 17 years old when we went on that trip. He's more than 50 now.
Sure. Look who you're talking to.
God knows what he's done. But of course, they all said, and they complained, and they got sick, and they had a hard time, and it was tough. And when we got back to Greenfield, I dropped them off at Walton Hill School. They said that was the best experience ever. Thank you so much. It was really good. I sent Eli off to school every day when we were down there. He was only just about 4 years old, but there was a little school about 100 yards away, and I made him a little school bag out of a bandana. I think I still have the bandana right here.
Oh, dear.
It's right there. And so
hold that up, will you? It's been worn.
So I folded up the bandana and sewed it into a bag for him to take his school.
That bandana.
No, not this one.
Oh.
His school supplies in. And so he went off, and the premise of the school was that it was Zapotec Indians learning Spanish for the first time.
Uh-huh.
Kids, 3, 4, 5 years old. So he was in the same boat. Eli and I took a trip there when he was 9 years old. So that was the first time that he'd been back in 5 years. He'd been 3, almost 4. And so this, I think it was, he was about 9, almost 10 when we went back down. So we went there, got off the bus, and I said to Eli, "Okay, Eli, where's the house?" I didn't say a word. He just looked all around, and he went, "That's it." And I said, "Okay, there's 3 doors. Which door is it?" And he went, "Oh, that one?" I said, "Yeah." That was an experiment. Yeah.
One last thing, complete change of topic.
Yeah.
Before we started this chat, we had set up over there in another part of this property
Yeah.
with that gorgeous outhouse in behind. You said, "No way, no way. I'm not going to sit in front of the outhouse."
Well, I would never have sat there anyway. But in the old days when I was here, we often sat here in the yard with the view behind. I would sit in.
You would sit where I'm sitting.
Yeah. That seat. It's a beautiful place, isn't it?
Telling you to let me be, let my heart get hard inside. Go back to that place you knew, to all those women that you loved. Take your old Chevrolet, park it on the hill above. The place where you took my heart, touched my legs and called it love. The place where the cold black water reflected all the stars above.
Okay.
I would not focus on this beautiful farm and have these with the outhouse that has the structure. How about the orchard? The orchard is on the hill. Is that all right, G?
Uh-huh.
Okay. All right. Let me bring you a chair for you.